Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, the number one source for news, analysis, and discussion on the Detroit Red Wings, the NHL, and all things hockey. Here are your hosts, Ryan Hanna, Brad Crisco, and Evan Lopsinger.
Episodes recording under duress are it's part of the game. I understand we have to do this, but it makes me more uneasy than anything else because we're essentially it's not even the hockey gods we're negotiating with right now. It's Steve Yzerman, and not just if he'll do something, but when. And there's a hard deadline of a roster freeze tonight at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. And after that, no moves can be made. But if there's going to be a move between the Detroit Red Wings and the Buffalo Sabres, it is going to be any time from now until 11:59 p.m. Eastern. There's no way that it's guaranteed to be earlier. So we're recording this, and the version of the podcast that you hear is not up to us. There might be inserts, there might be hard cuts, there might just be contradictory information. Godspeed to us, but more so to you, the listener. We're all in this. We're laying down the tracks as we go down the rail, as Evan would say.
So you think we have until 11:59 tonight? Do you remember what time I go to bed?
I have it on good authority that you intentionally ate all the chocolate that was left in the fridge of your wife. So I think she could be coerced into, waking you up and blackmailing you out of your slumber.
We'll see, I suppose.
I just put some Patreon exclusive content out onto the main web there. I'm sure you're not thrilled about that.
No, I am not. That is incriminating evidence.
Brad, what's your prediction? How's this all going to go down?
I was doing the math in my head. What's the absolute worst case scenario, personally, for this news to break? And I settled on 5:30. So it's going to come around 5:30 if it happens. If not, this is going to be a Family Guy style cutaway show.
Is anything we're saying right now even going to make it to air? Who knows? Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, a trade that might happen or has happened, just to make it fun to edit. Trades and news from across the NHL as things get kind of crazy, and lots more. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we're going to talk to you about last night's crazy Detroit Red Wings versus Philadelphia Flyers rematch. And it was a much, much different affair than what Detroit put forward the week prior against Philly. A wild game that saw Mo Seider having to play without Simon Edvinsson, and Mo Seider took a puck to the head at the end of the game. 10 goals. It was a wild affair where Detroit actually came out on top, and lots to take away from that game. As we saw Patrick Kane do some Patrick Kane of last year things, and J.T. Compher broke a streak. Fun game to talk about. Some other Red Wings news, and then the meat and potatoes of today is going to be, depending on if news breaks and when, but as of right now, rumored trade or potential interest in a trade between the Buffalo Sabres and the Detroit Red Wings, or the Buffalo Sabres and somebody, what that would look like, who might be involved, and what the timing could be, because again, there's a roster freeze tonight. We'll get into NHL news as the state of New York is apparently not doing so hot. When the New York Islanders are the least dysfunctional New York team, things are getting interesting. Trades that happened and lots more before we get into overtime. Before all that, I want to let you know two things. First, Winged Wheel Podcast Night in partnership with the Grand Rapids Griffins is Saturday, January 18th. Go to griffinshockey.com/WWP to get your tickets. There's a pregame live show featuring, yes, us, the host of the Winged Wheel Podcast, but also a special guest from the Grand Rapids Griffins. You also have an opportunity to get one of these sweet Winged Wheel Podcast and Grand Rapids Griffins co-branded beanies. So again, griffinshockey.com/WWP Saturday, January 18th. Also, if you go to the link in the description or wingedwheelpodcast.com/links, you can get tickets to Winged Wheel Podcast Night at the LCA in partnership with the Detroit Red Wings on Saturday, March 29th. Again, pregame live show, special guests, and the giveaway at that one is a Detroit Red Wings and Winged Wheel Podcast co-branded barber pole jersey in addition to the game ticket. So again, wingedwheelpodcast.com/links, or just go to the episode description. It'll have links to everything. Secondly, Hot Stove Stories Rounding the Bases with Mike Tirico and guests is on Tuesday, January 14th. Go to jamiedanielsfoundation.org to get your tickets. They are going fast. In addition to being hosted by Mike Tirico, it also features Jason Benetti, Dan Dickerson, Len Kasper, Dan Schulman. A fantastic event. It is a breakfast event. So again, Tuesday, January 14th, jamiedanielsfoundation.org to get your tickets, and you'll see some Winged Wheel Podcast representation there. Let's start with the Philadephia Flyers game, and what a game that was. Starting with, before a lot of people could even turn the game on, Detroit was down 1-0. Like, those notifications rolled in at the exact same time. Puck drop on the game, let's play hockey or whatever the tweet was, and Flyers go up 1-0. I was like, whoa. How? How that fast? Travis Konechny scores a minute in, pretty much, and we were all just like, oh God, here we go.
It's fairly impressive that a breakaway can even occur a minute into the game. It feels like teams sort of just feel each other out. Somebody dumps and chases. Nothing really happens. So the fact that the Philadelphia Flyers scored on a breakaway 1 minute into a game is very surprising.
No, this is the monkey paw curling, because Ryan was complaining a lot about games' actual start times recently.
Yeah.
And the hockey gods looked at you and went, fine, puck drops on time. Here's a goal. Good luck. Buckle up, buddy. We're going.
You're so right, too, because I'm going to complain about that forever. And there's always a good excuse. It's like the ceremony for this guy's 1,000th something, or, Heatley and Spezza in Ottawa, or, this guy, had a really great hair day this day. And so we did a 30-minute pregame ceremony, and that's all well and good. I'm a grouch, and so I'm like, just do it before the game then, and tell people, hey, show up at 6:40 instead of 7. Anyways, you're totally right. That's the hockey gods laughing in my face. So Detroit's down 1-0, and honestly, they weren't even playing terribly the rest of that period. I actually thought it was a much better performance than they had last time against the Philadelphia Flyers, which was one of their worst of the year. And thank goodness for that, because they were actually rewarded at the end of the first period, where Dylan Larkin made the perfect play to J.T. Compher, who pretty much just had to be there and lean on his stick and redirect the puck in the right direction. But Larkin to Compher on the redirect for the power play goal to tie the game going into the first intermission. And that was Compher's first goal in 22 games. So good for him to kind of get the monkey off his back there.
Needs to take a page out of Jessie's book, because I know she's been on the board a few times this year already.
Yeah, Jesse Compher. It's Jesse Compher's brother at this point.
If we're looking at the production, that's probably the more accurate way to describe it.
Yeah, but he has to turn it around, and that was a good first step. And I think the theme of this whole game was a lot of players had pretty solid games, all things considered. In that first period, we actually had to go back, because I don't think the broadcast covered it really that well, but Simon Edvinsson took a hit, what looked to be up high. We didn't get a lot of replays or a lot of angles at it, but he took what looked like a vicious hit down at the boards from Ristolainen, I think it was, and it didn't look good. And Edvinsson, it looked like a hit up high. He went down pretty hard. He skated around. He played a couple shifts, but then he didn't come out after that. And we don't have confirmation on it yet, but he left the game, did not return, which was terrible news. And because the Red Wings don't practice today, we're not going to know more. But even after the game, Derek Lalonde didn't have any updates, and he didn't exactly look thrilled about it. So I wonder here if this isn't something longer term. The good news is the break is coming up, but if that's a concussion and the spotters pulled him or something like that would be god-awful for Detroit.
Yeah, that was a bad hit. I wouldn't be surprised if Ristolainen got a call on it. It's not the most egregious we've seen in the NHL this year, but that was shoulder to head. They are cutting down on that this year, and it wasn't like it was he skated straight into him and Simon had the puck and should have been more aware. This wasn't Reeves on Hronek. The context was different, and it was a little, not blindside, but the type of head hit you really don't like to see. So could it be a concussion? Could it be a facial jaw injury? I think all are possible. Hopefully for his sake, it's not, and it was just precautionary more than anything else. But given that it was in the first period, yeah, I tend to fall on the not optimistic side.
There wasn't really a ultra definitive camera angle provided. The only one I saw looked like it was filmed on a potato, so it was really tough to tell. And mind you, Simon Edvinsson is 6'6", off skates, so if someone's going to get hit in the head, it's got to be pretty obvious. Rasmus Ristolainen, I think, is 6'3", 6'4" as well, so it's not a huge size difference, but yeah, clearly from, what you can kind of make out from one angle, there is some sort of head reaction, whether it's by impact or primary contact or not. It sucks for the Red Wings because Moritz Seider's been on an island his entire career, and the first time he gets someone who can actually play at his level, there's a real unknown when Simon Edvinsson might be back.
Like, if Edvinsson is out long-term, then I hate to be dramatic. I really do hate to be dramatic, but if he's out for any significant period of time, that's kind of all she wrote for any hope on defense for a long time. Like, you can do different combos of defense and maybe get a couple good games. Like, Chiarot and Seider worked out for this game and all was well in the end, but Seider had to be everywhere the rest of the game. Long-term, you can't have this defense lose, at worst, its second best defenseman.
Is Bowen Byram left-handed or right-handed?
He's a lefty.
Bowen Byram is a left shot.
What about Owen Power?
Lefty.
What about Rasmus Dahlin?
Evan, no. Evan, you're going to whip people up into a frenzy. We'll see on the Buffalo front, but as for Edvinsson and Seider, just whatever you can do to affect the hockey gods, pray that that's not long-term, because it's already hard enough for Detroit and for Seider. So expectations were low. When that was announced, everyone was like, oh boy, is that even it for this game? But man, the Red Wings, they rallied, and I thought the Red Wings altogether had themselves, it wasn't by no means a perfect game. It was a 6-4 game, so things didn't go great, but it came together in a way that worked. Alex DeBrincat scored on a classic Kane to DeBrincat play. DeBrincat on his 27th birthday gets his goal. They were pumped up. DeBrincat's 13th of the year. Patrick Kane was starting to look really great out there on the ice. And before you could even celebrate that too much, Philly came back 25 seconds later and tied it. But then the Red Wings kind of took some steps. Michael Rasmussen scored off a set play off the faceoff right away, beat Ersson. Beautiful play. It's exactly how you draw it up. It almost never works out that way. But right position, right time, and he was able to fire that home. Red Wings go up 3-2. And then Joe Veleno, like a minute and a half after that, is on a 3-0, was it?
3-0.
And him and Christian Fischer combined for a Joe Veleno goal. And the Red Wings go into the second intermission up 4-2, and things are looking great. And then it's the Flyers and the Red Wings, and it was all... Sean Couturier made an unreal play to Ryan Poehling at the far post and beat Alex Lyon, who, by the way, was healthy and playing, and wasn't a great game for him. Happy he got the win, but certainly he didn't get help on some of the goals and wasn't great overall. But Couturier to Poehling to make it 4-3, and then Owen Tippett with a highlight reel goal dances around Petry and Lyon and makes it 4-4. And we were like, oh, okay, what's going to happen here? A breakout pass to Patrick Kane from Mo Seider, and Patrick Kane streaks down the left side, scores short side, goes up 5-4. That was like a big Showtime goal that we've been missing for a long, long time. And at that point, I was like, this game has the energy of a game where Detroit actually pulls it all together. Like, that was it. I think it was really important to see Patrick Kane do that, because we've been calling for him to kind of step it up and play like he was last season.
J.T. Compher's first goal in 22 games. Joe Veleno's first goal in what was a million games. Patrick Kane's first goal in 10-plus games. You're not kidding when you said it finally all came together, because that's a lot of lengthy streaks that ended at the same time. And it's not like the Red Wings piled on 40 shots to get those goals. It was an average shot game. I remember late in the third period, the shots were like 26-21 or something like that, and there were 9 goals on the board at that point. Hell, I think the Red Wings had the Flyers at like 9 shots late in the second period. They were doing well in a low-event game. Goalies weren't doing a lot to turn it into the low-scoring game it felt like it should be, but hockey's a game of moments, and Kane's no dummy. When he saw the Flyers go on that change and that space open up, it's go time. And good on Mo to recognize it, good on Kane to hit the shot, and even just seeing him fired up after the goal was a relief, because he's been pretty blah in general lately in terms of his play, his attitude, excitement levels, so it was good to see him get fired up after that one.
The weirdest moment of the game by far, though, is not long after there's a delayed penalty. What happens is the puck is in the Red Wings zone.
An alleged delay penalty?
Alleged delayed penalty. And the ref is in the neutral zone right up against the benches. And he raises his hand and then drops it again after like a half second. But in that half second, the Flyers look to their goaltender, pull him, send their extra man in, not realizing the ref has dropped his hand. And so they have 6 men in the zone for God knows how long. The play comes out of the zone, goes into the Flyers zone, eventually gets blown dead because it's very obvious the Flyers have too many men on the ice. They get a penalty, and then John Tortorella almost gave us a live viewing of someone having an aneurysm bursting on an NHL broadcast. Like, he was losing his mind. And honestly, like, in an unbiased way, justifiably so, because what a mess that was. The referees talk about it, and then they decide, yeah, no penalty on the play, because they said the ref raised his hand and then immediately dropped it. But, the ref signaled penalty for a second, and so that's why they had too many men. I think that was the right thing in the end for the sake of the game, but I was like, I'm surprised they made that decision. Like, that, to me, I thought they would have been baked into holding the penalty because too much time had passed. Because what if they had scored? Or what if the Red Wings had scored? Like, what would have happened there?
I don't know the rule book well enough to know what legally by the rule book should have happened. I know ethically they came to the right decision because it was the ref's fault that the Flyers had too many men because they sent 6 men into the zone, realized, oh, it's not a penalty, threw Ersson back in the net, and obviously with the play being where it was, they couldn't pull a guy off. And then, the Red Wings, what was that, 2-on-1, 3-on-1 coming back the other way? Phrasing, I know. And the Red Wings almost did get a good chance out of it. Yeah, honestly, when the ref threw his hand up, I think it was a penalty. Like, I'm surprised he pulled his hand down. Like, I thought that was a legit tripping penalty. Just a mess of a situation. It's the one time, I shouldn't say one time, but one of the very few times I've watched an opponent of the Red Wings lose his mind, and I'm on his side. I'm like, yeah, no, he is absolutely right to be furious here. And then they made a call that did not go in the Red Wings' favor, and I was kind of relieved. I'm like, yeah, that whole situation was absolute BS. I'm fully on Tortorella's side here. Sure, I'm not going to complain if the Red Wings get a power play out of this, but they absolutely should not. And they honestly probably should have been on the PK. Now, there was a makeup call seconds later to counter that. But
how is that a makeup call? Because nothing happened to the Flyers. They didn't lose anything, and they ended up not getting the penalty. And not only that,
you could argue the Flyers should have been on the power play. It was, I think the play the ref threw his hand up and back down on, I think it was a penalty.
But the call that they called Kane on, that wasn't a trip.
No, it wasn't. That's why I said makeup call.
Yeah, it was a toe pick. The TNT broadcast even called it that was a toe pick, and everyone's like, "What's going on here?"
Yeah,
I was okay with the not calling the too many men. I get it, but with you miss it with the toe pick right after, and you're like, "Oh,
those are pretty obvious too." Like, Patrick Kane wasn't really in on Ryan Poehling's hands. His stick was kind of by his shin pad, and it was the most obvious toe pick. There's 2 refs out there. Like, I don't know how you missed that.
Tim Peel is still among us.
Like, NHL players aren't toe picking that often. Like, when you see one, you know it right away.
Apparently not. Someone got to.
Apparently not.
I have a suspicion that a certain referee last night got a call from the referee supervisor after that game and said, "Hey, man, what happened out there, bud?"
Yeah, not good.
Because the hockey gods are just, Detroit ended up killing that off. And in the end, actually, Lucas Raymond scored another empty net goal to seal the game from Dylan Larkin. And top to bottom, I felt that this was another game where Detroit had contribution in a way where, the whole game didn't go their way the entire time, but they had contribution from their best players. They had contribution from their depth. And that was the exact turnaround you needed to see after the previous Flyers game. Detroit wins 6-4. They have themselves a little win streak now. And, they get themselves some results. A fun game, Showtime game winner. Lucas Raymond gets another goal on his stat sheet, 13 for him as well. Larkin contributing there. Seider, who, even though the underlines don't represent it, I felt like he was all over the place. Seider took a puck to the visor at the end of the game, dropped, and I just thought, that's it. We're
done.
Fold the podcast, fold the franchise, fold everything. He pops right up immediately after because he is a German machine and is absolutely indestructible. That was the energy in that game was what Detroit needed to see at the LCA.
On the scale of how cooked is this season, it was medium going into the game. Edvinsson goes down, it went to medium well. If Seider was hurt, it was well done. She was over. It was no longer edible. And one small aside, good on Owen Tippett.
Yeah.
When Seider took a full slap shot to the side of the head, Tippett, despite being a very critical moment in the game, immediately threw his hand in the air, went, "Get the hell out here." This guy just took a clapper to the head.
Well,
Like,
he just
please.
turned Jeff Petry into a pylon, so there he's like, "Oh my God, they need this guy. Get help out immediately. Get the trainers. If this guy goes down, that's it."
Connecting came over right away as well.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, I will say the Flyers have a lot of dudes. Like, I'm a big fan of Konechny, especially. Like, just seems like an altogether, like, he plays the game hard and he'll grind and he'll get his elbows up in the corner, but seems like a good guy. And that was a nice little show of sportsmanship. Like, when it's real, everyone, all the players on the ice, they knew what to do.
Yeah, you twist an ankle, you're in the corner, I got a scoring chance, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
If he dies, he dies.
Yeah. Puck to the head. Oh, yeah, this guy might be in trouble. Get out here.
Yeah. That was good.
They're actually trying to, get help for the puck because Moritz Seider's head clearly is impenetrable.
That's right. Well, no, they were calling the shirtless guy who was trying to fight in the stands onto the ice, saying,
Yeah,
"Hey, we need you out here."
I thought that was Evan at first.
That's what I said.
Oh no, I would not be taking off my shirt in public.
Not anymore. No, maybe
No.
year 2 of the podcast.
Yes.
Do you notice that me from the podcast account and you from your own Twitter account posted the exact same thing? We actually did. We both. I said something like, "Someone go get Evan. We have to record tomorrow." And you were like, "I'm glad to see Evan's enjoying his night off."
That is about where I prefer to sit when I am at Red Wings games, though. So that is fair.
That guy was a truck. Like they had 7 security guards to
They
hold
had
him down.
7 people over the age of 65 trying to restrain him. I can't believe he broke away.
I felt
It was
bad.
literally Evan trying to be tackled by his pickleball crew.
Yes.
I have no idea what the story. I've seen conflicting stories. That is not the story I've been chasing today, so I don't have the details on that one. But the video is everywhere. But that I was like, oh wow, yeah. You'd honestly think it was like Friday night before the holiday break. That's how hard the party was going. But no, it was just a Wednesday night at the LCA, a rockin' one, and Detroit finds himself on a win streak.
It was Detroit's way of honoring Philly.
That is their way of honoring Philly. Like, hey, welcome. And to respect you, we're going to demonstrate our interpretation of your culture.
Yeah.
Our best interpretation of Philly man.
That's right.
Everybody's doing their like Christmas and nativity plays. Here's our demonstration of an Eagles game.
Unfortunately, their Florida Man games have been canceled due to safety concerns.
Yes.
Detroit wins 6-4. Upcoming in their schedule, they have the Habs on a back-to-back Friday at 7 p.m. against Montreal in Detroit, and then Saturday at 7 p.m. against Montreal in Montreal, before we're back with you on Sunday, and then we go on our own little holiday break after
Over
that.
under on Lane Hudson head fakes in the 2 games.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Line A power play goals. It's going to be...
Take the over on both.
Yeah, I was going to say Line A's going to have like 5 power play goals, and Lane Hudson's going to have more head fakes on his first shift alone.
I can't wait.
One of us is going to tweet something, and it's going to piss off all of Habs Twitter, and it's inevitable, and they're going to come for us. They're going to dox us. Like,
I should do it because I don't look at my replies.
you should.
You're very close to what's going to happen. It's going to be a Lane Hudson head fake on the power play that leads to a Patrick Laine power play goal. It's going to be a very mundane play overall, but Habs Twitter is going to go insane. We're all going to have sarcastic jokes in turn, in which then we will direct all the rage to Evan.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And Evan's going to post something heinous about the disrespect to the French Canadians, and then there's going to be a Notes app apology at some point. It's
I've
gonna be
never
great.
I've never been more motivated in my life.
Evan's going to have more characters delivered on Twitter that night than in the last 10 years combined.
Oh, I didn't know he knew how to do the EX Ontague. That's especially.
I'm going to get premium just to get my rant out
He's
against
got to
the French.
boost these to the algorithm.
Tune in to find out pejoratives you didn't even know existed at Hockeytown Evan.
All those jokes when like what's the best rivalry in hockey tweet gets posted and we're like the Red Wings versus the draft lottery is going to turn into Evan Lobsinger versus the province of Quebec.
That is very true.
Which is surprising because you do drive like someone who's from the province of Quebec.
That is the most insulting thing you've ever said to me.
No, but they're insane, but they're skilled. They'll drive 150 and drift into their driveways.
I have been known to do that.
So that's what I'm saying. Maybe you should do a little DNA, 23andMe.
That I don't want to do.
Oh yeah, we know too much about your past.
Well, I've always been curious as to what English royal family he's descended from because he hasn't told us yet.
Brad, they descend from him.
That's right.
He is a being ethereal. He's been here for much longer than any of us. Okay, other Red Wings news before we go to break here. I have to admit I didn't see this angle before, but the Petry goal that was a robbery and given to Michael Rasmussen was actually Michael Rasmussen's goal. CBC had the angle, but they didn't address it on their broadcast, and FanDuel Sports Detroit didn't have that angle. So it was actually shown to me after it did hit the back of Rasmussen's jersey. I don't think he felt it, but that's why the goal from the previous game, the Toronto game, was given to Rasmussen off Petry. So unfortunate, but
no, critical, because now Rasmussen's on a streak.
That's right. He actually has been. So great for Ras.
Trade
as well.
value's at an all-time high. Do with that information what you will.
Every Red Wings trade value is at an all-time high right now.
Relative to this season?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then also today it was announced that Ville Husso was sent back down to Grand Rapids. I don't think, based on my understanding and what I know is out there, that has anything to do with any trade rumors or anything like that. I think that's just Cam Talbot being ready to go again. And for Detroit's sake, you cap accrual, things like that, you send Husso down the moment you can. So you have Cam Talbot and Alex Lyon both ready again, and presumably they're the ones to go this weekend against Montreal, both games. All right, after this, we are going to talk about the trade rumor or the trade. Well, let's hear from the sponsors of the Winged Wheel podcast. More after this. This episode of the Winged Wheel podcast is proudly brought to you by Labatt Blue Light. Created in 1983, this premium light Canadian Pilsner is a delicately balanced beer brewed with Cascade hops and a blend of malt. It's fresh, crisp, and brewed to the highest quality standards. There's a little bit of Canadian kindness in every sip of Labatt Blue Light. How did it get in there? They're Canadian. That's how. You can spread the love yourself by sharing a Labatt. And when you do share a Labatt, you're not just sharing a beer. You're sharing an experience that'll pair with anything from hockey to a hoedown. So next time you're watching hockey with your buds, be sure to share a Labatt, because while you might not all root for the same team, although we on this podcast do hope you're rooting for Detroit, you can all enjoy a Labatt Blue Light. We honestly love going to games in Detroit and seeing Labatt being the beer that fans clamor for all over the arena. It's a reliable beer, and it's great to have in your hand when celebrating a goal. So head to the link in the description of this episode or the one you see on your screen to find Labatt in stores near you today. You must be 21 or older, and as always, enjoy responsibly. Welcome back. We're recording this in fear, but as of right now, this is where the information stands. There's some rumblings out in the world about some big moves potentially being in the works, or teams who are very motivated to make big moves, and things were going to maybe materialize before the roster freeze. And the roster freeze, to be very specific, is a holiday Christmas freeze, so that no one's getting traded as they're opening gifts with their kids. But from December 20th to the 27th is the holiday roster freeze for all players on an NHL active roster, injured reserve, or with non-roster and injured non-roster status. So as of 11:59 p.m. Eastern on December 19th, so effectively midnight, which makes it December 20th, a roster freeze is in place through 12:01 a.m. on December 28th local time. So until the end of the night on December 27th is when this freeze takes place. So as of right now, we're like 6.5 hours away from it. And that means if there's a move to be made and they want to make it before the holiday break, it has to happen in this next 6.5 hours. So if you're hearing this, it probably means it didn't happen. But what was out there was that there were some rumblings, the motivated teams, everyone knows what teams are in, crisis mode right now. It's the Buffalo Sabres, it's the New York Rangers. New York, who has already made some moves, Buffalo, who had a visit from their owner to the team. I think they were in Montreal at the time to give him a vote of confidence. I can't possibly imagine he cares right now based on how Terry Pegula's Buffalo Bills are doing. He's like, oh yeah, the Sabres. Sure, great job, guys. Anyways.
Well, he did fly all the way down to Montreal to give him a speech and then watch them get waxed 6-1 immediately after.
It goes to show the vote of confidence you have.
No, that 1 hour on his private jet. I hope he made it okay.
I do feel for the billionaires.
Yes.
He did end up in Quebec, though, Evan. So.
He probably didn't have to touch much of the ground, so he'll be okay.
It touches the ground. You guys are doing great. The plane takes back off. Anyhow, so the Sabres are in free fall. The Rangers are in free fall. And it was reported by Elliot Friedman that the Buffalo Sabres were scouting the Detroit Red Wings game last night. And that's not in and of itself something too atypical, because teams scout other teams for a variety of reasons at all times. That's what pro scouts do. But I think if you see the reporting out there from the biggest, insiders in hockey making note of this, it gives a little bit more fuel and validity to that fire. And also, it wasn't just a pro scout there. It was Jason Karmanos, the associate general manager for the Buffalo Sabres and one of the most powerful people in that organization. He's a guy whose name comes up on a lot of GM searches when a team's looking for a new GM. He will be a GM one day in short order. So if he's out there and something's brewing. So there is, I think, something to be said for there's potentially something brewing between the Sabres and the Red Wings, because the Red Wings as well, yeah, they've won these 2 games, but the Red Wings are also motivated to make a change. I think over the past, X months, they have maybe tried to get away from one of their contracts that they want to get away from. And whether that's Copp or Compher or Chiarot or whoever, those conversations could have happened at any point in a variety of different trades. Everyone will point to the Trouba situation as it evolved over the last 18 months. But I think Detroit has had interest in moving on from one of those contracts to free up money. And also Detroit knows they have holes in this roster, and we've seen it this season, that just haven't been able to be filled based on their moves that they made in free agency. So Detroit is also motivated to not come back with the same Red Wings that they've had so far this season. In my mind, this went straight to Cozens or Byram. Those were the names I was thinking about. And those are the biggest ones. So naturally, that's what we'll gravitate towards. Maybe it's a Peterka thing. You want to go crazy and go for a bigger name. I'm not sure it's sensible to talk about anything bigger than that. But to me, you get the sense that this could be big, potentially.
Wasn't it a few episodes ago, someone threw a hypothetical Sabres Red Wings trade at us? Thompson and Dahlin for Larkin and Seider. Just
stop. You the same as Evan. Stop. You're gonna whip people up.
Did they
into
know
a frenzy.
something we didn't?
No.
We'll find out. I don't know. Just saying. Was it Karmanos himself who was?
It was actually Kevyn Adams.
You and Kevin wouldn't get along because Kevin very obviously has an aversion to palm trees, and you do love them. So
true.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of angles that need to be approached here. One from Buffalo. Yes, this makes sense that they need to make a move. They are in free fall for the 37th year in a row. They are wide open to a shakeup. I don't know specifically which players. Cozens is where my mind goes first, just because he's having a pretty rough year, and he just signed that big contract not all that long ago, and they might be worried that that might be a ticking time bomb of sadness for them for a long time. I don't think so. I think it's just an off year for a young player, but I understand where they're coming from. For Detroit, it makes sense. They want to shed salary, because if they were in on a guy like Trouba, they couldn't do it without the Rangers retaining, because that's just their cap situation. And when you're a near capped out team and not likely to make the playoffs, it's a bad look. And also, teams are smart. Like, you always hear the copycat, like, this team wins the cup, we're going to try this. This team's going to win the cup, we're going to try this. There's 2 things that the Red Wings probably learned from the last 2 Stanley Cup champions, the Panthers and the Golden Knights, which is be aggressive, get your guys if you target a guy. But more specifically, you can't just get your guys. You got to get young stars the Buffalo Sabres have given up on. So it's not enough to make a trade for a young player. It has to be a Buffalo Sabre.
If it's a reclamation project, it is guaranteed to work if it comes out of Buffalo. They all win the cup.
Look at Jack Eichel. Look at Sam Reinhart. The proof is in the pudding. I don't even care which Sabre they acquire at this point. This is how we get the Stanley Cup.
Oh, James Reimer.
Yeah.
I almost don't even care what Sabre it is.
Let's talk about the players. So Dylan Cozens is the name that comes up. A centerman. We all remember him from the Moritz Seider draft. Right shot, 23 years old. He's signed for $7.1 million through the end of the 2027-2028 season. And Dylan Cozens isn't having himself the best time right now. 2 seasons ago, he was a 30-goal scorer, 31 goals, 37 assists for 68 points. The season after that, 18 goals, 29 assists for 47 points. And this season, he has 7 goals, 7 assists through 32 games. So Dylan Cozens is having a hard time. But I look at Dylan Cozens and I think, well, everyone in Buffalo is having a hard time. And that's not exactly you hate to say it, but it's that organization does not breed success. We talked on a recent podcast about loser energy behind organizations. Whatever the antithesis of the Boston situation or the Tampa Bay situation where they just win.
You don't even have to go that far. Just look at the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, it's the inverse.
And they own the Buffalo Bills. It's unbelievable.
So there's something to be said of maybe there is a lot of talent in there that could be reclaimed. And I have interest in Dylan Cozens for that reason.
Yeah, now he's got a 30-goal season under his belt. His shooting percentage that season was a little unsustainable, so it's not something I would expect him to do every year. But yeah, he's a 23-year-old center who's got a track record of some success in the NHL. What is there to not like in a gamble in that situation? Yeah, it depends on the cost. Everything depends on the cost. I should throw that out there right now. If the cost is a first-round pick in Axel Sandin Pellikka, obviously we're not going to like that. But the player himself is exactly what the Red Wings need. Because what's your best-case scenario for Nate Danielson? It's probably what Dylan Cozens was in that year where he scored 30 goals.
In his peak, yeah. I see, like, we're going to get into a couple names here. I think Danielson is a bigger ask than, say, a Kasper, but both of them are uncomfortable. Still, though, if you think Dylan Cozens can be that 30-30 guy, then you're getting into, that's the kind of guy you want on your team.
And $7 million is very reasonable for that guy. Like the Red Wings are talking about, not the Red Wings, we and every other Red Wings fan and everybody around the hockey world has been looking at the Red Wings forever going, hey, we see that giant black hole at second line center. Cozens isn't a bad bet to fill that role in the short and long term.
And if it turns out that, let's say you're keeping Nate Danielson, I'm not advocating to trade these guys. You don't know how this is going to shake out. But let's say you have Danielson and Cozens competing for that second line center spot. Well, then you have potentially 3 good centers, and you have the ability to have 3 productive lines being driven by a centerman. That's like, I've seen sometimes Red Wings fans go, well, you can't have 2 guys as your second line centers. Why not? Most of the best teams that win the Cup have incredible center depth.
The Florida Panthers last year had 2 first lines, a second line, and a third line. Yeah, you absolutely can have 2 number 2 centers.
Yeah. So Cozens is like a natural fit. Now, another one that came up was Bowen Byram, because that's a player who, again, they acquired in a trade from Colorado, and people thought he's going to be a great fit there. He has struggled mightily. And is Bowen Byram going to be what we thought he would be at draft time? You're going to find a lot of people to say, no, there's not that kind of ceiling left to that player. But is it too early? Again, 23 years old, same 2019 draft. Is there a reclamation project in there where he can produce and he just needs to be in the right situation? Because if you come in with, Edvinsson, Seider, Byram, Axel Sandin Pellikka, you're probably going to have to mix those pairings up if and when Sandin Pellikka makes it, because just for offensive and defensive acuity. But that's a solid top 4. And I'm willing to take that risk on Byram. How much is there to say about what he can actually do on the ice compared to what we thought when he went 4th overall in 2019? I don't think he was quite that player, but again, it's the Buffalo effect. Can you trust a player underperforming there when it seems like everyone is?
This could be my memory playing tricks on me, but I remember last season when Buffalo acquired him, he started on an absolute heater with the Sabres. And now the fact he's regressed, did the Buffalo of the Sabres get to him? Like he was just cooking when he got there. And it solves a huge problem at left D for the Red Wings for the long term, which is something we've been talking about a lot. Because again, that's what it comes down to. Is like the Red Wings aren't going to go give up, a ton of futures or a big asset or whatever it might end up being for a winger or a goalie with how they're sitting right now. It's got to be a center or a lefty in all likelihood. And the Sabres are in the position. They've got Dahlin, they've got Bowen Byram, they've got Owen Power, they've got Mattias Samuelsson. They've got 4 good to passable to great left D long term. Someone's got to go eventually. And if that happens to be Byram, someone smart should jump on that. Do I think Byram's going to be the guy everybody hoped he'd be when he got picked in the top 5? No, I don't think that ceiling's there anymore, but I still think he could be a very, very good number 2, 3, 4 defenseman.
And he is an expiring contract. He's an RFA with arbitration rights at the end of the season. So that's another thing to consider in there. So, assuming everyone hears this and this doesn't all get chopped, that means probably then if this trade is going to happen at all, then it would have to be after the break if it doesn't happen before, obviously. So it can happen after the break. There's no arbitrary deadline to say it has to happen. The reason this all spurred today is because, as a lot of smart folks like to say, deadlines spur action. And in this roster freeze, if teams want to figure out what they have, they want to do it before the roster freeze. With all that said, who would be the return potentially for Buffalo from the Red Wings if there is going to be a return? Because I don't know that Buffalo's interested so much in picks, and I don't know that Detroit's touching their first round pick from this year, because that could be a lottery pick. In all likelihood, as of right now, is a lottery pick. If they're looking for roster players or players who are closer to ready, but we're talking about big names like Cozens and Byram, are the Kaspers in the mix? Are the Danielsons in the mix? Does Buffalo value a guy with size and experience like Michael Rasmussen, for example? Not that he would do it on his own, but who's involved here? Because if you're talking shakeup, it's uncomfortable for fans. A good rule of thumb is if the trade proposal makes you uncomfortable, but you're still interested, it's probably close to realistic compared to the biased one you'd come up with.
This is the part that confuses me because I agree with you. I think Buffalo's in a position they don't want more 18, 19-year-olds that are maybes. They want some good roster players to replace any roster players that'd be given up because they're not starting over. But then you go up and down the Red Wings roster of, okay, who are the players the Red Wings are likely willing to part with and who would Buffalo want? And I don't see any overlap there. Kasper is probably the one where, okay, yeah, Buffalo can look at it. He's in the NHL. He's doing well. He replaces Cozens at center. Sure, but I don't think Kasper is going to be Cozens. So that's a net loss, or we'll call it a net negative for the Sabres. Now, obviously, this is where like picks and prospects can fill in value gaps. Rasmussen, sure, he can make some sense to them, but I don't think he's got super high trade value. The Red Wings aren't moving any of their big five. Like, they're just not. So, I don't know. It might end up being picks and prospects. That could be what Buffalo's angling for. Maybe they're like, all right, this core's not getting it done. Let's get younger where we can get younger and not restart this, but maybe retool on the fly. I don't know what to call it at this point.
Yeah, this is where I really struggle to see how a trade could formalize, because if it's a quote-unquote hockey trade, man, does it feel like a lot of lateral moves. And maybe that's what Buffalo wants. They want some sort of lateral move to just shake up the locker room, change the vibe, change the mojo. And maybe the Red Wings are the trade partner they're looking at. Does Buffalo want to get younger and add picks, or do they want someone who's, a year from being NHL ready, a la Nate Danielson type player? This is the one where I'm super confused on, and I really struggle to see the fit. But without knowing the motive for Buffalo, it's so hard to say.
It's worth saying too that if names like Cozens and Petterka, who we haven't really talked about, JJ Peterka in Buffalo, and Byram are out there, Detroit's not the only team involved. And an in-division trade is going to drive up the price and the friction and the viscosity to actually make it happen. So there's going to be other teams involved who are going to be interested in those guys. And there's, if you're the one selling those players, maybe there's a bidding war. So, we're talking about this because there's a lot of noise and a lot of smoke, and you can't report on everything you hear, but there's something substantial to be said about what is potentially going on in the background. But for anyone who's followed the NHL, more times than not, it doesn't actually materialize. So this could not happen at all, a trade for Buffalo, and especially could happen not at all in terms of a trade for Buffalo and Detroit. It could be another team. So that is another wrinkle in here. Is Detroit going to have to get into a bidding war? And at what point does that get to be ridiculous? Because does Detroit need to make a move for the season? No, we've been talking to a lot of people's disdain on recent episodes of you do what you can this season, but you don't go out and mortgage futures to save this season. Instead, you do what you can this season to enhance your futures. So whatever you do has to have a long-term benefit. And I'm a big fan of making a big move on Detroit because we've put out a lot of content recently to say the foundation of what they have set for the future is good, but they're just missing, it feels like, one big piece. maybe some other significant pieces, but that one big one's what's holding them back. So I think you need to be bold to get that, because God knows they're not going to win a draft lottery ever. So it's unsure and uncertain and uncomfortable, but I think it's the right move to be exploring this kind of option if you are Detroit. Even if it doesn't materialize, I think anytime there's a team like the Buffalo Sabres or the team like the New York Rangers, a team in meltdown where there's potentially a lot of talent for cheap, you consider that risk.
That's what I was going to say is, it makes sense to zero in on Buffalo because right now there's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of disgruntledness amongst ownership and players, and there's bound to be some emotional trades made where you can squeeze out more value than you could in a more static environment. So maybe there is something there.
And Kevyn Adams is trying to save his job right now.
Oh yeah.
And Brad said on a recent episode, like, he's not, the GMs in that position, they don't make moves for the next guy. I think you were talking about St. Louis. You don't make moves for the next guy. You make the moves for yourself. You care about your legacy, how you're going out, or trying to keep your job, in this case for Kevyn Adams. So, and you have a fan base who's pissed off at you for comments that were misconstrued but are still objectively hilarious. And if you're a Buffalo Sabres fan watching, oh my goodness, the analogs to Detroit. You're a Buffalo Sabres fan watching the Bills go crazy in the NFL. You're a Detroit Red Wings fan watching the Lions tear it up. Like, you are frustrated with this team, and you do feel like you do need to do something to move this along.
Probably was a good night for Patrick Kane to have a best night of the year then. Maybe that's how you ignite the fans. You bring Patrick Kane home.
That's the one wrinkle to this that I'm sure a lot of people are yelling into their car speakers about is a lot of these players, like, let's say Detroit, a big name goes the other way, but at the same time, they find a way to offload one of the big contracts, like a Copp or a Compher or a Chiarot. Or maybe they say this is how we get value out of Kane because, he doesn't have a long-term future here. And Kane's probably like, well, I'm not winning a cup here in the next year or two, so I'm going to try to look elsewhere. Not that Buffalo's the answer. But these players have varying levels of trade protection. Like a 10-team no-trade list, for example, is pretty standard in terms of what Steve Yzerman has signed guys to. So to me, that could also be a complication here. Is like, what's the trade protection? And if there's a guy involved with trade protection, are they going to agree to it?
You just waive him.
Evan, you joke, but
I wasn't joking.
You never joke. You're a very serious guy. You joke in French, though.
You're really trying to be a bad guy today.
Oui.
You are trying to be a bad guy today.
And I wouldn't be surprised again. We've talked about that on recent episodes. The trade protection is another thing like that. That may have come up in the past as well. All right, I think we've put enough of that out into the universe so that when you guys are driving away, the trade will happen. Or now that I said that, it is absolutely not going to happen, and we can all go into the break knowing that we can rest easy and nothing would happen until we're back from it. So we're going to wrap up that segment for now, but a lot of smoke. We'll see if there actually is fire. And before we jump into our final segment here, I do want to point out that Max Plante actually just made the World Junior U.S. team. So he and Trey Augustine are the American representatives that are Red Wings prospects. So great for, obviously, Augustine. That's no surprise. But for Plante to come back from injury and make that team, excellent job by him.
Yeah, there's a chance that guy is, in fact, a dude.
Seems like a dude. Okay, NHL news. There was a flurry of Red Wings-related trade, either rumors or actual trades themselves. And the big one coming from the meltdown that is the New York Rangers, Kakko to the Seattle Kraken in exchange for William Borgen, a 2025 third and a 2025 sixth. Your reaction to Kakko finally being out in New York, because he was scratched and he was pretty vocal about not being happy about it, and that whole project is over.
First of all, his quote was painfully accurate. The whole, you're singling out the young guy. Meanwhile, Mika Zibanejad's like a dash 112 or something like that. Like, he wasn't wrong to be upset, and Kakko's not ever going to live up to his second overall pick, and he's never going to be a big counting stats guy. But from all accounts and witnesses and games that we've watched, seems like a pretty solid third liner in the NHL, and he's still not even 25 years old. Will Borgen, I think, is getting dragged a little bit online. He's a better player than people give him credit for, but he's not anything special. He's a depth defenseman, third-round pick and a sixth-round pick, whatever. I always judge it as a good trade. If I'm sitting here, Detroit should have done that. Yeah, Detroit should have done that.
To me, it's. I don't think Kakko has a high likelihood of being like a needle mover in Seattle. I think you could be a guy who's like an everyday player in your lineup. I think, and whether this is because of, the development in New York, or he just never was the guy he was supposed to be when he's taken second overall, I just don't see him being an up the lineup impact player anymore. I could be proven wrong, but from what we've seen so far, I just think it was a decent pickup by Seattle. And for New York, they got something back for a player that just wasn't going to work out there anymore.
I think what he's likely to be at this point is a half point per game, usable 200-foot second liner.
Oh, so the Red Wings will get him.
Sorry,
Red Wings will get him 5 years out of his prime then.
Yeah. Second and third line is a big distinction. To me.
Third liner is what I meant to say there. But that, a high 30s, low 40s scoring third liner is a massive upgrade for Detroit in their bottom six right now, which is why I wish they would have done it. And he's got enough pedigree and he's young enough still that there's a, albeit slim, chance that he could actually still raise his ceiling beyond that.
Yeah.
I don't call it particularly likely, but it's possible. So I really like the trade for Seattle.
Pierre-Olivier Joseph goes from the St. Louis Blues back to the Pittsburgh Penguins in exchange for Detroit's very own future considerations.
Hell yeah.
That's it. It's a nothing move. And then the Nashville Predators got Justin Barron from Montreal in exchange for Alexandre Carrier, who was just re-signed by Nashville, I believe, in the summer. And so I was a little bit surprised to see that one. $3.75 million cap hit for Carrier goes to Montreal. I think that's a good pickup by the Habs.
I like that trade for Montreal. Barron wasn't even an everyday player for them. Carrier is a pretty good player. And off the top of my head, I don't know much about Carrier, but given his name, I'm going to say he's probably relatively close to being a Montreal local. So just all the great things happening to Quebec, much to Evan Lopsinger's delight.
Yeah, it's less the Carrier and more the Alexandre, spelled like Alexandre.
Yeah.
They really are loading up for this home and home against the Red Wings, aren't they?
It's, Evan, you are living in a movie about you and we're all paid actors and we're rallying you up for...
It is the Truman Show, yes.
Yeah. Well, the Truman Show is based on you. What's about to happen? It's just a whole time warp thing.
That is a very strange time warp, but
yeah, just wait until the CEO arc hits its ceiling.
Oh,
I don't know if the home game against the Red Wings is going to be Carrier's first game in Montreal, but if it is, he's scoring. You just know.
That's just how
we've seen this script before.
And then elsewhere in the NHL, we talked about the mess that's the Buffalo Sabres in New York. There's reports of players being disgruntled with management and coaching. There's players refuting that. There's, now that Kakko's traded, it matters less, but he was reporting the wrong guy was scratched. Ownership, not that Dolan is known for getting involved, but Dolan's involved. It's a whole thing. And my two thoughts are, how can Detroit capitalize? And oh my God, is this Broadway at its finest?
Well, how they could capitalize, they just missed out on to Seattle because there's not a lot of other great candidates there.
Yeah, you say that. They have a lot of big names, and you never know about the kind of returns those names could garner. Like, if New York decides they're out of this and another team can potentially pick up a massive name like a Kreider or Zibanejad or something.
No, thank you.
Things could get crazy.
On both.
Oh, I'm not talking about the Red Wings, but I'm talking about another team that wants to, Vegas gets everyone.
True.
So that could be it, but I'm watching New York and I'm like,
I have time for K-Andre Miller.
And for a second, I was like, oh,
what's Adam Fox up to right now?
Dream big. I like it.
So,
metaphorically speaking,
we'll see how that one plays out. I mean, the worst possible outcome here is that New York's just quiet for the rest of the year because you hope the drama continues to unfold. Okay, am I crazy or is Vancouver heading towards Petterson not being on this team eventually? Why is there so much noise around that?
My God, I've never seen a more public rift between two teammates who hate each other as everything that's come out about J.T. Miller and Elias Pettersson. I don't even know what they're not even playing them on the same power play unit. They're the two most skilled forwards on the team.
Well, it sure makes the Four Nations face-off a little bit more interesting because J.T. Miller will be on the American team and Pettersson will be on the Swedish team. That will be watched with a microscope by a lot of people.
If there's a fight, if that fight happens, it'll never happen. But if there's any kind of rift on the ice between those two guys, I'm sure Vancouver media will handle it
gracefully.
It's going to be gold for everyone who's not a Canucks fan.
Yes.
The Red Wings this year are having such a god-awful year in terms of the performance on the ice and A lot of the times it's just like not the most fun hockey to watch. But relative to everyone else, they're just kind of having like a normal bad year. There's so many teams who are either doing way worse than they shouldn't. You have Nashville doing whatever Nashville's doing, or you have teams either in the
self-imploding.
Yeah, and they were at the top, which is the New York Rangers, or at the bottom, which is where the Buffalo Sabres are. And so by comparison, if you're Detroit, you're like, I'm getting so much cover right now.
No kidding.
You don't have to be the fastest guy running away from the bear. You just have to not be the slowest.
Remember when we thought that the bottom of this division would be Montreal by a landslide and everybody else would be kind of battling for that third, fourth spot in the division? Well, everyone's been mostly bad, and it's a lot, I shouldn't say close because it's the ultimate mid-off, but man, has it not played out how a lot of people thought the season was going to go across the league.
A Christmas miracle. Okay. Quick break before we wrap up with our final segment here on the Winged Wheel podcast.
We're going to overtime.
Overtime is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. If you want to support the show, you get access to benefits like our Patreon exclusive Discord. You're automatically entered into all of our giveaways. For example, we give away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game, all of them going directly to our Patreon supporters. Additionally, you get access to our bonus overtime episodes, which record right after these main ones. The last 4 or 5 have been so
unhinged.
I promise you, if you're interested in any bonus content, it is a great time. So again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. Let's take some questions here from our patrons. Eric Asmus says, best thoughts on how long Trey Augustine stays in college? We know goalies take longer to become NHL ready. If Kosa comes to Detroit as the backup next year, should he turn pro so we can get started in the AHL? He turns 20 in February, and they are 2 years apart in age.
I mean, he's dominating this level for a couple years now. I think if I had to peg it 50-50 next year, he goes to Grand Rapids or he stays at Michigan State, because I could see benefits to both. Yeah, I'd say it's 50-50. He's dominated for 2 years there now. It's 1 year max, though. He won't max out the 4 years at Michigan State. That would probably be hindering his development at that point.
If Kosa makes a jump, I have to expect that they're, Augustine and Guylander are the next names that you're looking at for development. And because Guylander's there, you have some cover too. And now, don't forget, with Kosa, you establish more pipeline with the ECHL Toledo Walleye there too. So the Red Wings will rely on that system as well. Schmelt says, am I crazy? The team has started to look like they care all of a sudden. Vibes are improving, young guys taking steps, goalies getting healthy. The record isn't that far off what it was last year during the December tire fire. Can these pieces actually start to gel, and can we get back into the race? We're only 4 points back of a wild card spot right now. Give me a Christmas miracle, damn it, or some meds if I'm delusional.
I mean, it's not the 4 points. It's the sheer number of teams between them in that spot. I still have very serious questions about the roster, but yeah, the give a shit level's definitely risen. So, you got to take the small victories where you can get them.
If that level of care and consistency shows up every game, even with the lack of scoring prowess, that they have less scoring ability on the roster this year, if the effort stays the same, yeah, they'll be back in the mix. And I don't think that has to run counter to what we've talked about in previous, episodes about concerns with the team. They'll all still be real. But in a year where it seems like everyone is sucking and they're leaving the door wide open again, why not? Detroit could get in the mix. It is a big if. For a team that's been inconsistent through the first, X number of months or 30 games or whatever, it would be great, but it would be a pretty surprising story for that to turn around all of a sudden. And if that happened, I would be the first to applaud Derek Lalonde if they were able to do that. And what we've seen the last couple of games, yeah, absolutely. The Imperfect Patron says, besides Mazur, since he's been hurt, is there another Grand Rapids prospect you'd like to see called up this year? Has Lombardi earned a look if things keep going south this season?
I think Lombardi's the guy on the roster that probably needs to look next, because Danielson, you got to assume he's getting run next year. Mazur's hurt. I don't think there's a lot else there. Maybe one of the D, Wallinder, Tuomisto, just to have a look. I don't think those guys are going to be anything more than bottom pairing defensemen in the NHL, but yeah, maybe reward them for a good year.
I think I would like to see Danielson, and we have a very interesting interview coming, I think, next episode, barring something crazy happening.
I cannot give my answer because of that interview.
But I would like to see Danielson. And Lombardi, too. It's a really good point about the defense, Brad. I think Wallinder and Tuomisto, especially if nothing changes for the defense in Detroit, I'm now into, if things are going south, let's just see what you have there. Even if it's not promising, just throw it in and see what you got. If it's a bunch of like Johansson level where these guys need some cover and too much protection, then you send it back down. Who cares? But that might be it. The Dandy Man Can says, Jim Leyland used to say, it's not about who you play, it's about when you play them. Sure wish we could have played the Rangers 3 times this month instead of November. Yeah, and I think that's equal parts the Red Wings made New York look really good. And I do think there is something to say New York was more competent then. Like at the start of the season, they were way more competent than they were now. Maybe Detroit takes a game off them at the very least. Those would have been nice 2 points to have. They also go on to say, I don't have NHL Network. Did Berggren do something bad in the Toronto game? 7-minute ice time and then scratched. He's looked better than most of our bottom 6 here, in my opinion. So Berggren had the cross-check to Dewar's head, which was pretty stupid. Went to the box. Toronto scored right away. It was a dumb, preventable penalty. And I understand why Berggren was pissed off, but when you want retribution, you can't make a boneheaded play like that, especially one that buried Detroit immediately afterwards. And like, here's the thing. Berggren was scratched, and I get that people are fans. I'm a fan of Berggren. We're all fans of Berggren. But the Red Wings have been scratching pretty much every non-top 6 player all year. And Berggren has had a little stretch of rough games here. Like, he's not been at his best. There's nothing wrong with him watching from the press box. So, like, the people will point at Copp and Compher or other players who haven't been scratched, and that's very fair. But that's the entire NHL. Like, very rarely are you going to see a guy who's making 4 or 5, 6 million for 5 or 6 years scratched. It just doesn't happen. Owners don't like it.
Locker rooms don't like it, whether you think they're productive or not.
Yeah.
When you scratch a guy who's making that kind of money, like it everyone takes notice.
So whether it's Berggren or Veleno or Mott or whoever, just time to time Rasmussen, like it's okay. And I don't think Berggren's been some world beater. Like, I think that the disparity in performance of late between Berggren and Kasper, for example, like if Kasper was scratched, I'd be like, why? Because I actually think he's been good. And I think Berggren has been good and bad. And so
Yep.
It was a combination. That was the cross-check to Dewar's face was probably the final straw.
Yeah, it was probably time for a game off to get some press box time, watch the game from a different angle. It was his turn.
And knowing Berggren and the kind of guy he is, like, he's an emotional guy and he's very proud too. And there's a lot of good that comes with that, but from time to time you do need to kind of like get those guys' attention to get them back on track, especially if they're not playing the way they need to play to stay in the NHL. Sometimes you got to shake them by the shoulders a bit, and that means just watching from above. And there's a lot to be said of watching a game from that bird's eye view. You can see things unfold in a different way. They don't go up there and just like sulk. They might, but they tell them like watch, and they give them X's and O's and notes to watch for. Okay, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Winged Wheel podcast. We think this is the last time we're talking today. As of right now, there are about 5-6 hours left for something to happen.
Too much time.
Yeah, we're risking it. Thank you all so very much for tuning in. Thank you to the sponsors of this episode of the Winged Wheel podcast, and to all of our listeners, new and old. If you're a new listener, welcome. We don't always try to guess the future in episodes, but this is one of those fun ones. And if you're a listener of old, this is a fool's errand, and thanks for bearing with us. Patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to support the show. Again, the ticket giveaways, the Discord, the bonus content, which is a blast, I promise you. The Dub Club truly helps us so much. Like, it's the only reason we're able to do this show, how we're able to do it. Patreon supporters are the heart and soul of everything we do. So again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. And if you want to support the show, but Patreon's not for you, wherever you get your podcasts, hit the subscribe button, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, hit subscribe, and then leave a rating, whether it's just the thumbs up, the stars, writing a review. All of that helps us so much. And tell a friend about the show. Download the show, tell a friend, all that. It's a big, big help to us, and it's a way to support without being on Patreon. To all of our name level supporters on Patreon, we could not do this without you. Arjun Shankar, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Aikfer, Samuel Soderholm, Icon, Alexander Hansen, Ghost of OSBP, Glenn Brabham, Coroner's Left Knee, Ashley Whitehead, Sea Lion, Matthew M. Rice, Adam Rose, Adam Suiza, Admiral Matt S. at the Cheesebag Navy, Asher Killian, Beer League Legend, Best James Bond, Carl Brutina Nanaluski, Carl Provi, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, Cider, Dickens, formerly Marlon Winchester, DJ Denton, Eric Hill, Jin and UC, Give Blood Fight Probert, Goose Looney's Drinking Club, Griffin God Creatives, Hockeytown Matt, Hassam Al Qassem, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, Jeff Pridemore, John Ingalls, Jonathan Miller, Kaylin Wood, Marcus, Marty, Matt Keeler, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, Mickey Redmond's Mustache, Mr. Kuzi, R.A., Riley Enright, Roy Donk, Ryan Britt, Scott Martin, Skeletor, Stephen Ordeleb, That's What I Appreciate About You, Wallman's Elite Dancing D, Iserplan Stan, Aaron Hudson, General Andy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, A.A. Ron, A.B., All Motor No Hands, Ann Stanislavski, Antonio Gracias, Axel Sandy Pelka, Bellingham Acid Balls, Bex, Chimkim Nutgits, Commander Ben Barron of the Cheeseback Space Force, Connor Layton and Corey Prida, Darren Fick, Datsuk Dangleberries, Deep in Cider, Dylan Larkin Trade Sacrifice, Eric Nance, Evan Beckner, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Grepsky, Griffey Boy, James Pridemore, Jeremiah Dobo, Jim, JM Rhapsody, Joey Jojo Shabadoo, Josh Yelton, Chaotic Monkey, Keenan O'Donohue, Kasper the Unfriendly Ghost, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Larkin's Loyal Lemming, Les Grossman's Ungodly Firestorm, Linda Hull, Lonnie Zone, Lucas Raitmond, Mitch Minier. Now, I ain't saying she a gold digger, but she ain't messing with no broke chungus. Thank you for that, Reed. Ophelia, As Good As It Gets, Ryan M., Sam Migliaccio, Steven, that other guy, the Hodag, the Hat123, Trent Thorough, Wingsfan in St. Louis, Scott, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. Time to go tremble in fear for the next 6 hours.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to visit wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you'll find links to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find ways to support the show, like Patreon, official podcast merchandise, and more. And don't forget to follow us on X at Winged Wheel Pod, at Ryan Hanna, WWP, at Brad Crisco, and at Hockeytown Evan, as well as Winged Wheel Podcast on Instagram.